case that happened in 1994, but the two, as you correctly put out, Frans Toit and Theuns Kruger, were only sentenced in August of 1995 by the Port Elizabeth High Court. And they've been in prison ever since. They were arrested in 1994. And they were at times when they had reached the minimum sentencing period to be placed on parole, and they were unsuccessful until recently when they were then granted parole. But it has been a very long process demonstrating that a person sentenced to life carries a higher risk, hence even the process is much more laborious as compared to someone sentenced to a determined period. So indeed, on the 4th of July, which is yesterday, they were then placed on parole.
All right, and the process itself, of course, would also have input from the victim's statement or family. Talk us through how then, or who are those that then participate in the process of parole?
Okay, how it works is that parole regime does not come when an inmate has served the minimum period. It's factored in when a person is admitted. You have a structure called the Case Management Committee. It is a structure that will put together a correctional sentence plan of an inmate, detailing what would be expected of that particular inmate, having been assessed and the needs identified. So throughout the rehabilitation journey of an inmate, the Case Management Committee will be updating that particular profile. And once the person has then served the minimum detention period, they will then finalize that profile in terms of making sure that everything is included there, and also making a determination when the parole hearing processes will take place, where the victim will also be given an opportunity to make representation. Victims have a choice whether they will want to do it in person or a written submission, but they are invited to make that representation. And then from there, the process will go to the Correctional Supervision and Parole Board, who will study the profile, engage with the inmate if necessary, and then they will take that particular profile to the National Council for Correctional Services. What is important here is that the National Council for Correctional Services is chaired by a judge of the High Court, is comprised of other professionals, magistrate, attorneys, psychologists, and other general members of the public. They go through everything that is in that particular profile. They will then make a recommendation, which then go to the minister as empowered by Section 78 of the Correctional Services Act, who will then make the final decision. It's life has to fall in this category because of the risk, as I explained earlier. Then the minister will decide whether that person has to be placed on parole or not, and there will be parole conditions attached to it if that person is deemed to be fit. But those conditions are there to manage the risk that has been identified, and also to assist that person to adjust now into a normal life where expected to be a law-abiding citizen.
Yeah, and would you say it's justice served? I suppose from a survivor's perspective, that may not necessarily be the case, albeit that the two perpetrators have served almost 28 years in prison, but nonetheless, the corrections services would still have to supervise and ensure that the two parolees do not step out of line, as it were.
Yes, and what is important there is that the sentencing remarks were clear from the judge that if the two were to be placed on parole, they would have to remain on parole for the rest of their natural life. Hence, that is reflected on their parole conditions. We therefore have to monitor them. We have a system called the Committee Corrections, where you've got monitoring officials. They will make it a point that they monitor them and continuously update them if there are any changes, either to the address or maybe securing employment or starting a business. But we need to have eyes in terms of whatever activity they embark on, or even if they need to travel to an area outside of their district. So those conditions are there in terms of managing that particular risk. Yes, the victims may always feel that they will want people to die in prison. But unfortunately, the Act is clear that we have to rehabilitate people. And when they are considered to be ready for reintegration into society, we need to consider such. But the victim has to be involved. It's a decision that cannot be taken without the victim's involvement.
We certainly thank you for your time this morning on that update. We are speaking to Singabakho Nxumalo, Correctional Services spokesperson, on the Alison Botha, the perpetrators having now been released on parole after